all ought to have been brought up to be very polite to the elderly. So just remember that when you talk to me.
Yes, yes. We wouldn't be anything else, John, would we? You know,
No, not really.
This is Exmouth and District Youth 3A after all.
And we're never rude to each other on Zoom, are we?
No, we aren't. No.
No.
Now, John said he didn't want a long introduction, didn't you, John? So I've cut it down considerably. But just to say, welcome to everyone. It's really good to see so many of you here. We've got 995 members, and John is one of our active members with a variety of interests, both in our U3A and the local community. A keen cyclist, John is passionate about sustainable travel and is a member of Active Travel Exmouth and participated in the Strand Active Travel Day in April of this year. Now, this morning, he's going to give us a story or some words about a weird day out, with apologies to Wallace and Gromit. So thank you, John.
All right. Thank you, Christine. This is a true story. It's not terribly exciting, but it's very philosophical. So, and it's not related to Christmas. So if you want to leave, please leave. So let's get on with it. This is a weird day out. It was a weird day out. And it really started the day before. The day before, we hadn't got a clue it was going to happen. Wouldn't have been weird. A little bit of background. When we moved to Exmouth at the end of 2001, we had a house right down by the estuary in Mudbank Lane with a gorgeous view. And we used to wonder why the crowds of people gathered around looking over the railway line, Bank Lane. Our next door neighbour was John Swain, who, of course, was very, very influential in the bird watching when U3A started. And John told us that it was the best place on the River Exe for bird watching. We thought, yeah, well, you know, it's just literally 100 yards from home. We better start bird watching. So we went on a course at the Kenaway Centre and we got ourselves geared up and we used to go off bird watching, which we thoroughly enjoyed. Of course, a lot of the time we were able to look out of our upstairs living room over the estuary, and with a decent pair of binoculars, you could see all the bird activity. And for many, many months, we've been sort of watching all the oyster catchers and everything else, which all seemed to be based on Dawlish Warren. Now we could see Dawlish Warren, and Dawlish Warren is what, 45 minutes by car, about 2 minutes if you're an oyster catcher. And we'd never bothered to drive, you know, but we always wondered. So anyway, that summer, we decided that we'd have a day and go and explore Dawlish Warren. So we took our lunch and binoculars, drove over to Dawlish, and we walked over to the Warren, and we had a very, very interesting morning, wandering through the dunes, getting our boots full of sand, and counting up the birds. Great fun. And that was that. We'd enjoyed ourselves. We drove home. We negotiated Countess Weir. We were driving down through Tosham, and Jill said, oh, something or other, I've lost the lens cap of my binoculars. She has some very beautiful little binoculars made by a chap called Swarovski. And so I said, well, it's only a little plastic cap. I'm sure we can find something. So anyway, I said, I'm not turning round from here and going back through all the traffic. So we carried on home, and she was still whittering on. Now, I'm sure I know where I dropped that lens cap. So I thought, oh, all right, okay. Anyway, over supper, I said, well, okay, we'll go back and have a look, but we can't tomorrow because we've got a man coming to service the boiler in the morning. So we'll provisionally say the day after tomorrow. Right? So the next day, the boiler man came on time, did the job in about 10 minutes, by which it was about sort of 10:30 in the morning. And it was a lovely day. So we thought, let's change our plans. We won't go tomorrow, we'll go today. Get this thinking thing over and done with and lay the ghost of the lens cap to rest. So we drove over and we were going through Kenton about 11 o'clock. And I said to Jill, do you want to stop for a cup of coffee? Because, you know, we might be quite a long time paddling around in the sand. So we decided we'd stop at Powderham Castle because there used to be, before they built their posh, expensive restaurant,
Yeah.
long, thin coffee shop running away from the shop.
Mm.
So we pulled up in the car park, and at the same time, a zonking great coach arrived and started disgorging lots and lots of people who all started heading up the steps into the shop. And we looked at each other and thought, oh, hell, they'll all be going for coffee. Shall we abort and go on to Warren? And Jill said, well, if we nip in the back door, we might beat them to the queue for the coffee. So we shot in the back door. There's only 2 or 3 people there sitting along a long bench with benches the opposite side. So we got our coffee, we sat down, and I mean, you remember, Jill, we both talked to anybody. And we started chatting to some people who obviously were off the coach. And rather like this poor unfortunate lady at the Queen's reception, we said, where are you from? It was all right, you know, nobody worried. They weren't in funny dress or anything. And they said, well, we're on holiday in Sidmouth. So we thought, yes. Why did you choose Sidmouth? Well, they said, it's very odd because we always go every year on a local coach company which takes us on a mystery holiday for a week. And we don't know where we're going. It's not a holiday in Sidmouth, it's a holiday. And we just take pot luck. And when we get there, we go on mystery days out. One of them. So there are these people on a mystery holiday to Sidmouth, on a mystery day out with a mystery coffee stop at Powderham Castle. Life gets very peculiar, doesn't it? So, well, whereabouts do you come from? Oh, well, we live down in Sussex on the coast. So where does the coach come from? Well, it comes from Storrington, little village at the back of the Downs behind Worthing. And where did Jill and I live until we got married? Rustington, a little village on the seaside of the Downs, not far from Storrington. So we lived there for ages, and we got chatting about Rustington and Angmering and Littlehampton, which is where most of these people lived. Great, you know, this was good fun, you know, we enjoyed it. So by this time, nearly all the coach party had exhausted the delights of the the Powderham Castle shop, and were wandering through. And the last couple, right at the back, was the chap, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, you're John Petty, aren't you? And I looked at him and I said, you're Hugh Tucker. And we were both correct, of course. Now, the last time I'd seen Hugh Tucker was about 62 years previously, when we'd been at prep school together. We grew up during the war. Both our fathers had been called up, but we parted company when we were both packed off to boarding school, different boarding schools. And for some reason, we never met. We were always in trouble. Because during the war, our fathers were away. My mother used to blame Hugh Tucker for getting me into trouble. And Mrs. Tucker used to blame that John Petty for always getting Hugh into trouble. But anyway, we were great buddies, and we just completely lost touch until that day, a few years ago, in the Powderham Castle coffee shop. So I think that must count as a fairly considerable coincidence.
Yes.
So that was quite enough of a weird day out. But we got talking because the coach was doing quite a lengthy stop, so people would spend lots of money in Adam Castle's shop. And we started talking. Now, talk about different lives. Hugh had decided after he left school, and he became apprenticed at a local engineering company in Littlehampton. In fact, probably about the only engineering company other than lots of shipyard boat builders, but not general engineers. And he married. I don't think they had any children, and they lived in the same house in Littlehampton, just round the corner from one of Jill's aunts, and still lived there. Jill and I, when we got married, had moved. I'd had 8 jobs. We lived in 8 or 9 different places. And we'd all ended up at Adam Castle in a coffee shop. Very odd. So I said to Hugh, and what did you do? He said, well, I went into engineering, not really knowing what I wanted to do, but I was fairly practical. And I worked for this firm, Duke of Ockenden. So I pricked up my ears and said, oh, I know Duke of Ockenden. And he said, yes, our main business is making machinery for the construction industry, but it's for little portable drilling rigs that drill small water wells all over the world, but also drill holes to take soil samples out, to design foundations. So I said, well, I know that. He said, how do you know that? I said, well, for 10 years, I was the boss of a little company in Basingstoke, belonging to the Costain Group, big civil engineers, and our job was manufacturing equipment for drilling holes in the ground for water wells and taking soil samples for civil engineers to design. There were 3 companies in that business, all exporting worldwide, competitive. One was Duke of Ockenden, one was Pilcon Engineering at Basingstoke, and the other was a firm up near Doncaster. So for 10 years, without knowing it, he and I were deadly rivals. Anyway, by that time, the coach party was leaving. Everybody was shouting for Hugh and his wife to get a perishing move on. Party company. So Jill and I were sort of reeling from the shop. It had been a very, very long coffee break. And we sat there, we had another cup of coffee, and we thought, shall we go to Dawlish Warren? Oh, I suppose we've got this far, we'll go to Dawlish Warren. We wandered through the sand dunes, me trudging along behind, Jill very determinedly walking on in front. And she bent down by a bush, said, here's the lens cap. And we went home. Now, that's the end of the story. I'm sorry it's not very dramatic. It's not very funny.
It's interesting.
It just makes you think, doesn't it?
Yes.
What a small world.
You think it started there,
Yeah.
and you can't see him, I can't point. That was Hugh Tucker, who was there, and that was me.
Oh, that was that.
I found the picture after I got home. Take my father in 1940. So you start to think, I mean, it begins to get, is somebody pulling the strings? What made us? I mean, until a few days before, well, until we moved, we were not interested in bird watching. A few days before, we sort of vaguely thought we'd go to Dawlish Warren. If when we went to Dawlish Warren, people hadn't lost the lens cap, we'd never have gone back. We were going to go back 2 days later, but because the boiler man was very quick, we went 1 day later. Then you look at the coincidence, the other end of the mystery holiday, followed by the mystery day out, followed by the mystery coffee stop. How does it all happen? Anyway, I'm sure, I thought when I did this, it's not very exciting, it's not Christmassy. I bet some of you can match that with another story.
Yeah.
And knowing how the Coffee and Chat group That's
Yeah.
all Pennyworth. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Very good, John. And I bet lots of other people can come up with other tales as well that are just as intriguing as yours. That was excellent.
May I
Super.
just say that I because Audrey is online, we have a coincidence, don't we, Audrey? On a bus coming back from the Topsham meeting of the EdFAS, and I happened to say, where did you come from? And she told me, and I told her I came from Leicester. And she said, my uncle was a doctor in Leicester. And I said, oh, was he? What was his name? You know, thinking, well, there's loads of doctors, you know. And she said, Dr. Mann. And I said, he brought me into the world, my sister into the world, and he was our doctor for over 20 years. And Audrey and I didn't really know each other, did we, at that point?
We do now.
We do very well now, but that was really weird. And your story, it is, I do think fate has a way of putting this in. As you said, all this was such a coincidence, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
All the things that happened as you built up to it, it was very well done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have
Yeah.
you kept in touch?
Oh, Marjorie and I do, yeah. Oh, my uncle died some time ago, but I still keep in touch with his son, who's a cousin of mine.
Yeah. But John, have you kept in touch with this person?
Yes, we did for a while, but frankly, we ended up with nothing in common.
Ah,
You know, I mean, yeah, great. It was interesting. Jill and I had a funny philosophy. I suppose we were a bit fatalist. We took what was dealt to us and made the best of it always. We were always optimistic. And life was littered with coincidences.
yeah.
You're so lucky, John,
I
because
mean, I just another very simple example. We ended up living in Ipswich, which we loved. I had a good job there, which I was there for I think we were there for 4 years. And Jill, because the girls had grown up, they were one was going to be about to go to university, and that was sixth form. She got a lovely job, quite accidentally, as the membership secretary of the Royal Harry's Yacht Club. And she was very good at it, but it was a royal yacht club with God knows how many thousand members. And she really enjoyed it. My job was a disaster, and we ended up moving to Devizes in Wiltshire.
oh no,
Yeah. And the thing that worried me was that Jill had found something that she really loved doing and had to give it up. We had a most amusing move, but a week after we moved to Devizes, we had through the post the magazine of the Kennett Nave and Canal Trust, to which we belonged for years to support canal restoration. And in it was a lovely article, leading article, which we're pleased to announce that we bought the bonded store in Devizes. We are turning that into our trust headquarters, and we are in urgent need to recruit a membership secretary.
oh,
1 week after we moved, a fortnight after she left her job at the Royal Harry's Yacht Club, she phoned up and got the job. And
wow,
she did it for 15 years. So, you know, fate deals you lovely cards, say thank you and get on with it. Fate deals you some bad ones. Sometimes you go down a track that doesn't work, so you've got to have the guts to turn around and go and find another way through. And it just happens. But it's fascinating when you start to think a bit deeper, isn't it?
Elaine had an interesting one recently. Have any of you ever been to the Great Dorset Steam Fair? And it's an enormous steam fair where there are a very large number of steam engines, steam traction engines, steam lorries, all ploughing their way through the fields churning out black smoke. And there's an enormous fairground, mainly of ancient types of fairground stuff like helter-skelters and merry-go-rounds. And Elaine wanted to go on a merry-go-round with this horse that goes up and down a pole. It's very old-fashioned. I didn't go on it because I was looking after the dog. And she got off that and came and sat down in front of an old organ to listen to the music and have something to eat. Anyway, we used to know a couple very, very well, and we used to come down to Sidmouth regularly in the summer years ago. We knew them very well for about 30 years, and they all turned sour, and we didn't quite know what was going on until at a much later time we found out that they were having an estranged relationship, and we lost complete track of them for 11 years, and no communication. And that was it. That was the end of what was a good relationship. And then 11 years goes by. Anyway, we sat down with our lunch at this organ where there were only a few people there listening to the ancient merry-go-round, what do you call it, a fairground organ.
Carousel.
And there were probably many, many thousands of people at this site in total, the Great Dorset Steam Fair. We'd chosen to go on one of about 5 different days you can go, all the way from Exmouth, which is about a 2-hour trip. And this lady came and sat next to me and said, "Hello, do you know who I am?" And it was the lady who we'd not seen for 11 years. And she'd come on a day trip from Coventry on a coach. She was supposed to be coming with someone who couldn't make it. She thought, no, I'll still go on my own. And she sat down next to us and said, "Do you know who I am?" And it was a complete shock and surprise. But she'd said, after retiring, and she'd gone away for a week's holiday from Coventry, and they'd gone to stay in Exmouth, not knowing that we actually lived here. And in that entire week, when we were regularly down the seafront, because it was August, enjoying the weather on the seafront with walking the dog, and she'd gone to various attractions in the town, but we never bumped into her. She didn't know we lived here. And it took to each of us going for a 2-hour trip to somewhere on a particular day to sit down at this site where there are thousands of people on the site. And there we are, sat next to each other. So they're great friends again now. So that's a good end to the story.
Just goes to show it's a very small world, isn't it?
Oh, I was just going to say there's another coincidence that Margaret and I found that we had grandchildren who went to the same school in Edinburgh and were in the same play together. Margaret.
I've often wondered how often when you drive up the motorway, you are just a few yards from somebody you knew really well in your past, but you happen to be passing it to 140 miles an hour either side of the fast lane of the motorway.
Yeah, yeah. I have a few comments on coincidences. Make of them what you will. I think we notice coincidences because we notice them. When we come across a coincidence, we remember it and think of all the other occasions for the whole of the rest of the time when there are no coincidences.
Good point.
So, you know, make of that what you will. I personally think there's nothing special about coincidences, except for the fact that when they happen, we really notice them.
That's the scientist talking in.
Yeah, absolutely, that's very deep, very deep.
Yeah. What I loved, John, about your story was that I could picture Jill, because I've got so many fond memories of Jill, and that was lovely. I could just see her out there enjoying things and having a drink of coffee, because so loved seeing you both together and coming to your house on that occasion for the U3A transport session. So that was really lovely. Thank you.
There's a look of triumph on her face when she picked up this.
Yeah.
Told you so.
Well, I was going to say that was a triumph, John, because I've lost things out on photo shoots and I've never found them again.
Yeah, an interesting coincidence in Glasgow. I've been on holiday in the Outer Hebrides on Barra, and when I'm on holiday, I always keep a sketchbook and notes. And on the way home, I decided to call into the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow because I'd never been there. And I went to see the Charles Rennie Mackintosh room and various other, and the Rayburn painting, the MacNab, because my son-in-law is chief of MacNabs. And I sat down in the entrance hall to just update my notebook. And a woman came and sat a couple of seats from me. And she started chatting and she said, "You're writing a lot." So I sort of flicked through my notebook and she said, "Oh, and you do little paintings as well?" And I said, "Yes. I always keep a holiday journal." And she said, "Where have you been on holiday?" So I said, "Well, particularly Barra." And she said, "Oh, I had a friend who retired to Barra, an artist friend. She bought a bothy on Barra when she retired, Peggy Angus. And Peggy Angus was my art teacher at my secondary school in London." It was a big exhibition. I thought she was just a regularly art teacher 5 days a week, but she was at school 2 days a week teaching and 3 days a week being a professional artist, and particularly tiles and fabrics. And there's a primary school in London which has still got her tiles all over the wall. And I went to visit that, but it was absolutely fascinating. She had a big exhibition. There was a big exhibition of her work in Eastbourne about 5 or 6 years ago. But just such a coincidence when she mentioned Angus, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I've just remembered a coincidence that you might be interested in. I was at school in Burnley Grammar School, Lancashire, and after leaving the sixth form, we all went our separate ways, and I went to Nottingham University, did a PhD, and then got a job working for what was then the CGB at Berkeley Nuclear Laboratories in Gloucestershire. And I've been there for quite a few years and came across a new face. And I thought, I recognise that person, but it can't be, can it? And it was David Greenwood, who was in the same class as me at Burnley Grammar School so many years ago. And, you know, that's another coincidence. But as I said, there are lots of very, very many more occasions where no coincidence exists.
I've got one as well. I went to teacher training college at Bishop Otter in Chichester. And one day we were at our U3A iBook group, which is led by Lynn Milson Ashby. And we were reading Kate Atkinson's Life After Life. And one of the questions was, had you had any unusual experiences? And I said, well, when I was applying for jobs, I applied to go and teach in Enfield in my third year. And they said, oh, when you finished your fourth year, just write to us and you can have a job, that'll be fine. So at the end of the fourth year, or coming up to the end of the fourth year, I contacted Enfield, of course, by post. And I sent in a new application form, didn't hear anything, requested another one, got it, sent that back, still didn't hear anything, requested another one, got that one back, and didn't hear anything. And one day I decided I would just turn up in Enfield. So I turned up in Enfield, the Civic Centre, was interviewed, went and saw some schools, went back and finally got a job at Freezy Water St George's C of E school in Enfield. It was always a very awkward school to write on application forms because it took such a long time to fill it in. Anyway, at the end of this discussion, Lynn said, what schools did you say you taught at in Enfield? And I said, well, Brimsdown Infants and Freezy Water St George's C of E primary school. So she said, oh, well, our husband, Colin, is the son of the head mistress that I had worked for in Enfield. And the likelihood of that was so remote from Exmouth to Enfield. He's living in Woodbury, and and he is just the splitting image of his mother. So every time I see him, I just remember his mother all those years ago.
Mhm.
But the likelihood of that was so remote, really. It was incredible.
Can you hear me all right, everyone?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
I can't speak too loudly because I'll be broadcasting to the whole carriage. I've just been told to leave. It's not a quiet carriage, but we've just arrived in Sheffield, so I managed to get some of the signal, but you faded in and out. But I got the gist of it. Anyway, what I was going to say, I had an amazing coincidence. I'll only give it 60 seconds, but I play golf, or tried to play golf, as some of you know. And we arranged a golf day at a golf club in Dartmoor, or Dartmoor area. I've only played there once. And at that particular time, we were playing, and I recognised someone. I thought I recognised someone who had like me, a beard which had gone slightly grey. And I realised immediately someone called Derek Hathaway. Now, Derek Hathaway was on the same training scheme in NHS management that I was up on in Manchester. And he was. It's just a prover at Sheffield. And he lived in Manchester. So I thought, well, what's he doing here? He'd actually moved here with his family about 2 or 3 years ago. And again, it was a coincidence. It's like Ian's theory. But how amazing that on the one time I've ever played there, he happened to be playing. He's a member there, but happened to be playing at the same time. And we'd met after, what, about 45 years. So I think Ian's absolutely right. Scientifically, it's just a quirk of circumstance, but we do remember these coincidences. Well, I'm sure we've all got views about that. Window, here we are, just to prove I am at Sheffield, and we're just about to depart. And I'll suddenly fade out, nothing personal, but I think we go through a bit of a tunnel in a moment. But what I was going to say, and I'd be interested in Ian's thoughts on this, is what are your views on multiverses or multi-universes and parallel universes? Because there are views that we are sometimes slightly out of phase, and we live in different universes at different times. And it's just a coincidence we happen to be here right now. I think it's an amazing coincidence we as human beings actually exist. And Anthony knows much more about this than I do. But in terms of the history of the Earth and the climate being just right to sustain human life, and the fact that we humans are here, we've probably got another 100 or 200 years before we blow ourselves up. But the fact that we're actually talking today and meeting is an amazing coincidence of nature, I think. Yeah. Anyway, that's my view. I'm shouting over the loudspeaker, so I'll shut up now. But nice to see you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John.
You asked about multiverses and such like. I'll tell you what I think. I think there could be, or there could not be. I think it's amazing what we have found out in over recent centuries that we never could have ever imagined. And so what that means is that it's very, very likely that there are things in the future that we just cannot imagine now that will turn out to be something such amazing. On the question of humans being living here in just this circumstance that suits us, that's not surprising because the circumstance comes first. We sort of live on a planet that has a certain general sort of temperature, has an atmosphere of a certain composition, and if any life's going to develop, it will develop in a way that can take advantage of those conditions. In other words, the conditions, the temperature, the air, and the rest of it came first, and we developed because we were able to take advantage of those conditions. Lots of other things might have developed if in different conditions, but of course they wouldn't develop because the conditions weren't right. So it's just a natural consequence of where we are at what time. But it's amazing that we are only comfortable in a very narrow range of conditions. We can't properly survive if it's very cold or very hot. We can't survive if there isn't enough oxygen. We're lucky that there's such a thing as gravity that keeps our feet on the ground most of the time. And it's a set of coincidences, if you like, that just favour us. Well, they would, wouldn't they? Because we couldn't survive if in different conditions. So it's sort of inevitable that anything that lives at the moment has developed because of the conditions, not despite them. Right, that's the end.
I think it's called the Goldilocks spot, or the Goldilocks something or other. Conditions are just perfect for everything to work as you say. I think that's the term for it.
Yes, it is.
What would have happened if the meteorite hadn't hit the Earth 66 million years ago? How would things have developed differently?
Yeah.
There's a program on TV. If you're going to look for somewhere else to live, it's only lasts 2 or 3 weeks, and it went through all the things you need for us to live in another planet. And I vaguely remember it coming down to one tiny little green thing in something else that was needed to start it all off somewhere else. I don't think we can do it in our lifetime.
There's a related question, and it's: do we think that life exists anywhere else in the universe?
What form?
Which universe?
Exactly. Well, any universe. My own feeling is the balance of probability is that, of course, it does. It would be really unusual if it didn't, wouldn't it?
Yes.
There's so many locations in so many distances away in all sorts of directions, stars with planets and so on. It would be unbelievable if we were the only life in the universe.
I think this could lend itself to a complete hour's discussion. But I think going into how many universes there might be, and infinite possibilities in infinite universes, there are infinite number of systems where an infinite number of planets could have an infinite number of different types of life form.
Yes.
It goes on and on.
Yeah. And people who imagine or even wish that we had a visit from aliens ought to be very careful what they wish for. I think any visit from aliens would stand a huge chance of wiping out all life on Earth, because they might well carry diseases that we have never come across before and have no immunity to, and that will be the end of us. Some might even say we deserve it.
It's the power of your story, John, that the conversations have got so deep and interesting and varied. So well done on giving such a wonderful story that sparks such fascinating conversations. Superb. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah. John, you want to say something?
Well, I did warn you that my beloved Jill's little plastic lens cap would be philosophical. I thought it would, knowing you lots.
That reminded me when years ago I was going for my first teaching job in Leeds after going for 40 years to teacher training. The family were up in Scotland. I had to come home for an interview. So they went out for the day. And when I got up, they said, "We've lost your favourite potato peeler." I said, "We just lost it on this loch with the sand around it and all this." And I said, "Oh, let's go and have a look." Here it is. I walked straight in and picked it up, and there it was. And they searched everywhere for it.
When my husband's father died in 2010, we've got an unusual surname, Chittock. It's not quite so unusual in Suffolk and Norfolk. And we put a notice in the local paper in Norfolk, and the funeral director was contacted by somebody who had met Morris's father, Robert, on one occasion. And the one occasion was when they had gone down to London to sign up in the Second World War. They had gone back on a train to Norwich, and because of the blackouts, it had got very, very delayed. And Robert's friend that he'd met when they'd signed up wasn't going to be able to get back to his own home because he lived further than Norwich. So Robert said to this man that he'd just met, "Why don't you come and stay with my parents?" He stayed with his parents, and he had never had any contact with Robert since then until the funeral in 2010, when he turned up at the funeral. It was absolutely incredible to meet somebody like that, that had met Robert on one occasion and remembered him all that time because of the generosity of his mother taking him in that night. Quite remarkable.
I can always talk about ghosts.
Well,
Well, you can perhaps. What have you got to tell us about ghosts then?
Yes, when I was about 6 before the war, we didn't have television, we didn't have books, we didn't have all of these stuff we have around now. And I was about 5 and 6, and I wanted to sleep in the above the billiard. There's a 4-bedroom house. I wanted to sleep in a certain bedroom, never used. Because everybody else, my mother, I slept with mother, my sister in one, my brother in another. And I thought, well, I wanted to sleep in the room that was over the billiard room. So eventually I managed to get there. And you've got the room, you've got the bed, back, window, exit to the hallway to the sister over there. And I was sleeping there quite happily. And I woke up and I saw this little old lady start from my right-hand side in a corner, walk all the way around the bed, and I was watching her, looked at me and walked all the way back. And as soon as she got, I jumped out of bed over the corridor into my sister's room. I don't believe in ghosts. There cannot be such things. What did I see? I mean, I think it was actually my grandmother, because I think I had been to the house once before with mother, before I went to school when I was about 3 or 4, to look at it. And then we moved into that house. Because, no, I don't know the history. It's what I can remember as a 3 or 4-year-old. And we went to live there. And I forgot what I was going to say now. Typical. But we didn't talk about ghosts or anything. We didn't know that sort of thing. We didn't see them in pictures. There were no stories, there was no television or anything about ghosts. So where that came from, I think it was my grandmother, my mother's mother. And we did visit there once. I never saw her, but yeah, weird.
yeah, I think, well, you won't be surprised to know I have thoughts about all of this. I think we underestimate the power of our brain to interpret the world around us. The brain does wonderful things with the images from our eyes. Somehow or other, in some wonderful way, it manages to make sense of 2 images from each, one from each eye. And the brain works really, really hard to convert those 2 images into what we call 3-dimensional one. Anybody who wears glasses will know that when they have a new prescription, it takes a few hours to get used to the new images that the glasses provide for the brain to work on. And eventually the brain's so wonderful that it does it. And it does all sorts of other things without us being aware of it. Now, I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility for our brain to imagine that it sees things that aren't there. And I think a lot of the examples of ghosts that people occasionally talk about I don't think there's anything there. I think it's a result of our brain manufacturing things which might be quite indistinct, but the brain looks at an image and makes something of it. So we might imagine something indistinct, but the brain works on that and produces something more distinct, neither of which actually exist except in our mind. Just a thought.
Well, a mix of a dream and reality.
Yes. I think a general comment, I think we ought to be pretty open-minded about all of this. I don't think we're in a position to say, yes, it's true, or no, it isn't true. But I don't think we know enough about these sorts of things to be definitive about them and to say ghosts don't exist or ghosts do exist. I think we just got to have an open mind.
Ian, do you think this would be a good moment to give a lovely round of applause to John and then just show my short
Yes, I think
visual?
so. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, John. That was superb. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A Frosty Morning, and it's images I took last January walking along the multi-user path from the Exeter Road down to the Estuary Trail. And I walked towards Limpston on that occasion, and the blackbird that you will see was taken then. It was quite difficult because it was covered up with a lot of twigs and everything, and I had to do quite a lot of work on the photograph. And then we've recently had the frost, as you know, but it was following a dry period. So the icy frosty scenes with the puddles are from January last year, but then there's some from this year as well, and some beautiful berries. There's a tree on the multi-user path. It's a new tree and I don't recognize the berries. So if anyone knows the tree, I'd be really pleased to know what the name of it is. It's ever so short, but anyway, I hope you enjoy it.
That was really magnificent and
Yes,
really captured what we all experienced
yes,
only a few days ago, really.
yes.
It seems ages ago now since we've had the
Oh.
rain, but it was absolutely magnificent, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just give Christine a clap for that.
Yeah.